Welcome to the Sales versus Marketing podcast, where we speak with sales, marketing, and business leaders. I'm your host, Scott, and I am super excited today to be sitting down with Kenny Mackenzie, who is the Chief Product Officer at Predictable Revenue. Now, if you are in sales, or if you're just in tune with all things sales and marketing and business, you've probably heard of Predictable Revenue, whether or not it be the term, or the book, or the organization where Kenny works. Predictable Revenue was founded by Aaron Ross. Now, Aaron Ross is a little bit of a legend in the sales industry and sales circles. He was the individual who was responsible for building out Salesforce.com's sales framework. So he built out a process called Cold Calling 2.0. This essentially helped increase Salesforce.com's revenue by over $100 million, recurring revenue by over $100 million, which Aaron Ross then used to write the book, Predictable Revenue, which helped companies understand the process that he implemented at Salesforce, as well as also build out the organization, Predictable Revenue, which now acts as a consultancy service to help organizations do the exact same thing. So Predictable Revenue obviously acts as a consultancy, but they also help find product market fit for products, unbundle and unpackage what companies have done, and rebuild out the entire sales organization from the ground up, and really just act as an outsourced sales department, sales expert, sales business unit, whatever you want to call it. They're incredible at what they do. Now, Kenny Mackenzie is the Chief Product Officer at Predictable Revenue. So Kenny is a serial entrepreneur. He's had several successful businesses, founder and CEO of businesses that he has started in the past. He has moved from various advisory roles to high growth, successful startups before signing on full time as Chief Product Officer at Predictable Revenue. Kenny is not only responsible for the continued and ongoing success and growth of the organization, but he brings a very, very interesting lens through which he views sales and insights that can help companies truly find proper product market fit and exponentially scale. And he does this, and this is shown through the products and services that Predictable Revenue now offers to customers. So I really, really hope you enjoy this interview. This was an incredible interview, and Kenny was a wealth of knowledge. So grab a pen and paper, sit back, relax, and let's learn a little bit from Kenny Mackenzie, Chief Product Officer at Predictable Revenue. Thank you again for listening to the Sales versus Marketing podcast. Today I have the Chief Product Officer of Predictable Revenue, Kenny Mackenzie. So Kenny, thank you so much for joining me. I really am excited about this. I think,
my pleasure.
Yeah, I think we've all, if you're in the sales arena, you've heard of Predictable Revenue in one way, shape, or form, regardless of whether or not it's the book or the company or whatnot. So I guess give us a little bit of a rundown of what Predictable Revenue is, and then we can sort of dovetail into who you are and what you're doing.
Sure. So Predictable Revenue is basically a company that helps people with outbound sales development. So we help people do it themselves or we'll do it for them. And that's basically everything from developing the strategy that you're going to proceed with, like the market strategy, to the execution. And from when it comes to execution, it can be, what channels do you use, like how do you write your messaging and all those sorts of things. But it's also about how you build your team and how you, onboard your people, how you recruit, how you do performance management, pretty much everything to successfully fill your pipeline with outbound sales.
So where did Predictable Revenue come from? Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. Aaron Ross wrote the book in 2010 following his experience at Salesforce. So he was a pretty early hire at Salesforce.com and helped them develop their outbound sales development force and basically establish sort of their standards. And, that's where he had discoveries like, basically the transition of doing things like cold calling to switching over to email as an outbound channel. Back then, that was pretty novel, as well as splitting up the roles of a salesperson into things like a sales development rep and a sales researcher. So like more role specialization and more of like sort of an assembly line sort of system in sales. And then he wrote the book in 2010. It was quite a successful book, of course. And meanwhile, one of the other co-founders, Colin Stewart, was building a company, basically building a CRM from the ground up a few years after the fact, struggling to basically commercialize that, and finding it easier when he spoke to his clients to basically just help them with sales development and basically doing outbound sales campaigns for them, kind of as a way to bootstrap along the way. And then that ended up just becoming its own company. So he kind of let go of the whole CRM plan and just sticked to building software that would help with automate and streamline sales development. And then I forget when exactly, but I think it was like around 2014 or so. I guess actually before that, Colin had been reaching out to Aaron and asking for advice and sort of like hounding him on podcasts and just kind of following around, asking him questions and stuff. And long story short is they ended up merging into one company.
So I actually didn't know the second piece. I didn't know. I know the story of Aaron Ross, and I think that he's almost like a little bit of a celebrity in the sales world, right? But I didn't realize that was the collaboration of the two coming together that eventually formed the company, Predictable Revenue.
Yeah, so like they actually like doing the outbound sales as a service, and we basically do sales development as a service. Like that aspect came from Colin Stewart and sort of him, just doing the usual grind. And then basically combining, Aaron's experience and sort of wisdom in the space with Colin's hustle, kind of got us to where we are today.
And where are you today? Where is Predictable Revenue? Even like terms of team size, ARR, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Sure. Team size, I think we just crossed 40 employees. We are based in Vancouver, California, and technically we have someone in Ontario, and also Mexico. We're in two different cities in Mexico. So we're spread out quite a bit. And I'd say I don't know if I should share from an ARR perspective. Yeah, I think I'll leave that out. I don't know if you want to edit that out after. But
No, that's fine. I don't mind that. You guys are private. I was just sort of getting the idea of the scope of the company. Do you have any, so for people that don't know the company, to sort of put a little bit of perspective about it, do you have large clients that you're working with now that we would know, like household names?
Probably not. No, most of the our sweet spot is basically like mid-sized firms that their deal size is 15K and up. I mean, we used to say 10K, but I think with sort of just the economy evolving, inflation and whatnot, like these days it's better to go a little higher. B2B, of course, and generally they have a reasonably new offering that's like somewhat novel in the market. So it's an exercise of really informing the market. So there's already pent up demand. There's people who want progress in a certain area, and there's this new product or service that can help them make that progress, and we're bringing that to them.
And that's kind of what I wanted to get out. So I wanted to sort of put a little bit of context around who you actually are targeting, because I want to sort of circle back to how you help these companies that are a little bit more early stage, and what you see they need the most. But we can sort of go back to that later on, because that's probably going to be part of some of the services you provide and some of the expertise and guidance. So I think that's really important. Because I want to sort of get some lessons learned out of working with some of these early to mid stage companies. Because I think that the ability to take a product to market and to be a consultant in an early to mid stage requires a much more robust skill set than sort of going into a finite business unit within a large corporate environment that already has all their processes and procedures in place, and maybe just doing some very, very targeted sales training. Now that could be a little bit of an assumption, but I think that it's a lot more moving parts that you have to sort of take into consideration when you're working with a small organization. Because I've personally worked with some, and it's a lot of work. A lot of things going on at once. So.
I think there probably are some brand names that people would recognize, actually, now that I think about it. We've been working with Red Hat recently, and I'm sure there's others, but to be honest, I just they're not all coming to mind at the moment. And also, some of them have agreed to case studies and stuff like that, and they're on our website, and some, we're in process with them, and I don't know if it would be appropriate to share. So
no, that's totally cool. I totally get it. So let's go back into you, who's Kenny? What have you done? And how did you get set up with Predictable?
Sure. So my background is I started a company, and it originally started sort of as a bootstrap like way. I was just basically doing software development, consulting, and so like my background is actually as a developer. I did that for a couple of years and sort of grew up to the point where I'd grown beyond myself. I had sort of more work than I could do on my own, but I didn't want to just develop a service company. I wanted to develop a product company. So at the time, there's a lot of hype around wearables. In particular Google Glass. It was actually before the hype. It was sort of, I saw the hype bubble coming, and funny enough, I got one of basically the first Google Glasses to kind of like become public out in the world. And at the time, everyone was super curious about it. So we got our hands on it. And long story short is we developed a company that we built a company that developed software for wearable tech, helping industrial enterprise. So our sort of vision was, let's bring superpowers to sort of the industrial worker, and give them access to more information, give them better communication, that sort of thing, hands-free communication. And so we worked on that company for a number of years, and ultimately we struggled with the product market fit side of things. We did a lot of, we did over $1 million in revenue spread out over a few years. And they're all pilots and things like that, but we just sort of struggled to get to that next step. And there's a lot of reasons for it. And, I've learned a lot from that experience, but ultimately what happened afterwards is I realized I really want to understand this product market fit thing. Like, I don't want to, following that experience, I learned that, the average success rate of a product startup, really launching a product in any context, is about 5%. And so I thought to myself, am I going to do this 20 more times before I'm successful and still maybe not make it? Yeah. Or am I going to really figure out what's going on here and sort of hack the odds and be able to, increase that chance so that maybe I got a 50% chance or something like that instead, by cutting through sort of the randomness and actually understanding the first principles. So I kind of went on a quest to understand what are the first principles of product market fit. And did about 9 months of research into that, and then started consulting.
Just on your own?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just on my own. At first, I did a lot of experiments, kind of testing different sort of business model ideas and things I had around that space, helping startup founders, helping product managers with product market fit, trying to test my boundaries. I did 100 and some odd customer discovery interviews over about 9 months, and kind of packaged it all up into a research report, which is I shared with a couple of people. It's a little bit personal, but if there's someone who's really interested in it, I'd probably be willing to share it. And
that's really impressive work, man. It's a lot of effort. Yeah. Congratulations.
And then I got into consulting and started working with predictable revenue sort of in a product manager capacity. And I thought it was just an incredible place for me to, they have a great culture here around sort of entrepreneurship and taking initiative and, kind of picking your own responsibilities and things like that. So I got the opportunity to, come in as a product manager and then sort of, just roll with kind of how the company was evolving, and sort of evolved into more of a service manager, and then eventually sort of took on responsibility for how we develop our services, how we sort of develop new services, and also keep our services up to date, and sort of how we manage our innovation. So I also manage our software development, so what software we're building to kind of support our services. So the title Chief Product Officer, it's more like Chief Service Innovation Officer or something like that. But yeah,
well, I was curious because you're a born developer, and you built out your own SaaS solutions and whatnot, and and a variety of different tech solutions, and now you're working in something that seems to be like a service provider, almost like a consultancy, but obviously you have software solutions on top of that. So I'm curious how I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this question or this statement. How somebody with a traditional developer mindset that's very logic driven and process oriented, how did you find working and building out sales processes? Did you find that it was something that came naturally to you, or did you find that the traditional personality that's in sales doesn't see eye to eye with somebody who is more logic or process driven? I'm just sort of curious as to your take on that, because I don't talk to a lot of developers that were originally developers, shifted into a sales consultancy position, and you're obviously managing the whole service, and you mentioned service and product portfolio for predictable revenue. So I'm just wondering what your take is on that, and if there was lessons learned as to how to sort of bridge that gap.
Yeah, so I mean, a heck of a lot of reading. I think I read about 60 books over the last 2 years. Not all on sales development, but definitely a handful of them. And so just kind of consuming all the theory is a big part of that. So that helps me build sort of like mental models, like sort of places to put the information. And again, like I was really trying to understand the first principles of product market fit. And it's funny, it's a pretty minor thing, but like one of the sort of inflection points in my story is a friend of mine recommended this book called Competing Against Luck by Clayton Christensen. And, it was one of those books I read, but it was one that kind of like, it's about jobs to be done theory. And at that point, I was really kind of struggling with what's going on here, like with my last company. And it went click for me. And, I've done a lot more, like I've done a lot of learning about market research and things like beyond that. But there's something about jobs to be done theory that just really helped me understand these things. And so I've been basically applying all those things I learned during that sort of research phase to sales development, like merging the two things. So first I learned about sales development and I learned about all the first principles about that, or at least the current best practices. And then sort of I tried to apply the first principles I'd been learning about product market sort of fits and sort of the theory behind that. And like essentially like what motivates people to buy things,
Mm-hmm.
what motivates people to buy things. And that's what jobs to be done is it's like, it's almost a coin with two sides. Like on one side of it, it's how to make things people want. And then on the other side, it's sort of like how to make people want things. And so at Predictable Revenue, like when I first approached it, I really want to understand how to make things people want. And at Predictable Revenue, I've been sort of using what I learned to, essentially help make people want things. But, it's like really what it is. It's associating what a product or service can do with what someone wants to do and helping connect those dots in a way that, everybody wins. So that's kind of our philosophy here, or at least mine.
I think that the reason why I was sort of bringing up that point about how you sort of transitioned is because I think that what I've seen, at least personally, is a classical issue that sales individuals have selling to more technical individuals is they can't bridge that gap of the way that an individual processes and consumes information. And to be able to reverse engineer that, I think, is a huge value add when you're going in to help a company build out their sales force, because I think that a classical sales individual definitely has a little bit more of an issue just from a personality point of view, selling to like a CTO, director IT, whichever.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's funny because in the early days, I started out basically as a product manager, managing our software team, directing them what to build, and started talking about, hey, why don't we have a service that does that, or what if our service did this instead, or what if we stopped doing that, and because basically my role, like my users that I was trying to serve were our service providers, like our consultants. And so they were my user. And so at a certain point, I started realizing, okay, but the customer, like our users isn't really the customer. Like it was actually a really interesting, dynamic from a product manager perspective, because I couldn't just look at the users and kind of optimize what they wanted to do. It would be, because then it's a local maximum problem. Like it's a local optimization problem without looking at the whole company. So I kind of took a step back and I realized, okay, my role would be, I'd be better serving the company if I look past just what the users want to what our customers want. And then sort of took some responsibility for what our users are doing and then made that easier. So like what should they be doing versus what are they doing, and make what they should be doing easier.
Yeah.
And then my sort of knowledge around the product market fit theory helped, because one of the challenges that we face is, we bring in new clients and then we have to unpack their product market fit. Like we have to unpack who are their customers or who are their potential customers? What does their product or service do? How does it help them? And often our clients, like the reason maybe they're hiring us to help them with sales is because they haven't figured those things out. That might be one of the reasons why they're struggling, or maybe they just haven't even started. And so getting really good at that and really fast at that, and being able to sort of like build processes and systems to be able to do that like in a scalable way, or at least in a repeatable repeated success. Has been sort of largely my focus, and sort of developing services that support that, or building that into our existing services. And I think that like the sort of systematic mindset, I mean, in those early days, like I would get roped in a lot into where we had like one of our service providers that was maybe not happy with how the campaigns were performing for one of our clients that were selling a very technical solution. So, maybe they're selling like some database automation software, or something for DevOps, or something to manage big data, or all sorts of different solutions. We had one that like would automatically generate APIs, and so our service providers wouldn't necessarily know how to speak to that audience, just like you're saying, and so they'd pull me in and I'd help them, and we would kind of come up with creative ways to talk to that audience. So yeah, there wasn't a component of that. But I think like at the end of the day, you really basically have, it kind of boils down to, are you bringing someone, are you bringing something to the person that they want, and then are you credible enough that they'll believe you or they'll listen to you?
Yeah.
And there's kind of two, and I kind of default to the logos, pathos, ethos, like time old way of looking at it, which you basically have sort of the credibility of your character. You have like an emotional appeal, and you have sort of a logical appeal. And technical people like logic.
Yeah.
So you can lean heavier on the logic appeal for them. Whereas, depending on the persona you're reaching out to, you might lean more on, look at the results, we got someone else, or, some sort of emotional appeal, like, hey, I read this post and it really inspired me, or something like that. Like, so there's all these sort of, like, when we reach out into someone on outbound sales, like, what are the components that actually go into that message? And like, we kind of really thoughtfully craft each one. And it really, to me, it boils down to either it's like relevant to what the person wants, or it's sort of like building equity in our relationship.
So you're kind of going in that direction anyways, which is what I wanted to speak about. So what is the total summary of what predictable revenue can do for somebody? And the reason I want to go into your product offering and your service offering is because it's all focused on helping sales, driving revenue, just optimizing what a company already has. So you mentioned a couple things, but let's just go over like the broad scope of everything that you guys can do. And then we can sort of go into what's most effective in certain scenarios for companies, and sort of like, I guess, top takeaways that you've learned for your core clientele.
Sure. So broad stroke is we do, we help people find successful sales development. So basically we help people fill their sales pipeline using outbound sales development. And, when you look at the gamut of marketing and sales activities that are designed to fill the pipeline, primarily we're operating on email and sometimes on social media, usually LinkedIn, and we're doing cold calling. Like, that's the majority of what we do. So, you compare that to something like pay-per-click ads, or, like another marketing agency might do. Like, that's one of the differentiators, or one of the sort of things that makes this more specific. We help people in two different ways. We either basically will go in and help them sort of diagnose what's not working with their current situation. If they already have a sales development team in place, we'll basically help them fix it and get it running like best practices and on producing results. Everything from, are you targeting the audience, are you targeting the wrong audience with a right or wrong message? Like, basically getting a strategy nailed down, to actually like optimizing the execution of the team and making sure like the right metrics are being tracked. You got your dashboards up, you got the proper role specialization, you got the right compensation plan in place. Like, really, if you want to build out your own team, we will make sure that you're doing that to the best possible that you can. But that's that's one half the business, and it's in terms of like our revenue, it's the smaller half. The larger half is it's sales development as a service. So basically, we act as your sales development function, and so we basically just book meetings into your account reps or your account executives' calendars, and we act as an extension of your sales team. So, we'll meet weekly, and we'll craft the strategy, we'll craft the campaigns. We basically do everything for you. We do write all the copy, and then execute and book meetings into your team's calendars, and obviously have an iterative loop where the meetings like aren't right, if they're not getting the right prospect, or they're not like set up in the right context. We constantly iterate, and we have like a variety of ways of delivering that. We also have a service that we call Outbound Validation. It's very new. It's actually a service I developed that, I've had a lot of help with the team on, so I can't take all the credit. Rob Heaver's done a lot of great work too. So shout out to Rob. But it's basically a way of like, what we do is we create like a theory about a variety of market segments. And we create basically it's like a psychographic theory. So we essentially say, we think that this specific group of people, like these titles in these companies that have maybe anything that we can target, anything that like we can dig up from a data provider. So like any targetable attribute, basically, we think that these targetable attributes will be correlated to these wants. So we think that they'll want these things. And it's not about wanting a product. It's about wanting some contextual progress. It's like wanting to get a job done or wanting to accomplish a goal and facing some obstacle. I mean, that's how we think of customer pains. It's like, you have a goal or some contextual progress you want to make, and you're facing some sort of an obstacle that's preventing you from getting there or making it harder than you wish it was. That's what we are trying to find. And so we create theories of these, and then we break them down into like explicit hypotheses, and we test them, and we'll test them as fast as we can. So we launch like up to 40 unique campaigns in 2 months. And what we find is that the results are almost always like a power law distribution. So in other words, we come up with all these different ideas of like groups of people to target and like ways to start the conversation with them, talking about what we think they want. And usually like less than 10% of our ideas will produce more than 90% of the results, like the meetings booked or the pipeline. So what that tells us is that, like basically you got to iterate and you got to try lots of ideas. It's like A/B testing, but it's like A through Z testing. It's like we just sort of like, it's not that we're blasting a bunch of people with the same message. Like we're crafting very specific personalized messages along the way, but we're doing it like at a very large scale. So we're kind of like scanning the market almost with like these personalized messages. So
that's a really cool product, and I don't think a lot of companies have the resources or the capability to do that effectively for there's outbound sales message. Like they do it with traditional marketing, right? They'll do like they'll A/B test ads or
exactly.
But I've never heard of somebody doing that at scale outside of maybe doing like two potential email writing two different copies of emails and seeing which one has the higher response rate, and that's about it.
Yeah. So we'll do that, but we basically realize, hey, if we're going to learn this, like if we're going to get over the hump with a client of understanding what it is that their target market wants, we need to like 10x sort of the volume of ideas we're testing. And so, yeah, it's very much like, I mean, I've done AdWords before and things like that, like pay-per-click ads. And it's very much like setting up like a whole bunch of AdWords, like Google AdWords or whatever. You come up with a whole bunch of different ideas, you put them up there, and then it pretty much just optimizes towards whichever ones are converting. It's like that, only the cool difference here, actually, that makes it really uniquely valuable, even for marketers, is that we aren't just like tracking whether or not someone clicks. We're actually getting qualitative responses from people. Like they're actually replying to our emails and telling us things. So even if someone says like maybe or no, or like every response we get, we classify as either positive, neutral, or negative. And then we have like a secondary set of classifications where, it would like the more specific context around it. So, neutral might be like, hey, I'm looking for more information, or, this is interesting, but not right now. Check back with me in a few months, or, thanks, I've collected your information, but we're pretty happy with the current vendor right now. So it's like there's might be an opportunity to try and go back and dig deeper. Neutral is, of course, like not interested, that sort of, or sorry, negative is like not interested, that sort of thing. And positive is, they ask for more information in a far more sort of like excited sort of way, or
even like tone of the reply, right? Like that could be
exactly. Yeah. And so we're just classifying these things, and then we summarize all the results. And so, certain campaign ideas will produce more positives, and, and we can find things like, we learn all sorts of things based on those qualitative answers. And it also informs us because they might say something like, oh, no, I don't know what this is about, but you should talk to so-and-so in this department. And then they might give us an idea for a different job title. And then we go, oh, we didn't know about that job title. And we go and look it up in a data provider or LinkedIn or something. We're like, holy cow, there's 4,000 people with this title. And then we realize that's the people we should be targeting. So we get this qualitative feedback in addition to the quantitative that you wouldn't normally get with like a pay-per-click ad sort of really broad sort of scoped A/B testing that helps us navigate through the uncertainty and find where is the sort of market fit.
That's why I see so much value in your experience as somebody who was more like that's, so it's all coming together now because this is a product that you were sort of championing. Obviously there's other people that supported it, but the things that you did in your own company, and then the things that you did after the fact when you're speaking about like this research study that you put together, now you're really just applying that to sales, and that's really what has I'm sort of speaking and putting words into your mouth, just sort of like contextualize for people that aren't as heavy on the product side, but this is really what you're doing, and you're just making this process so that it's very easy to understand behaviors outside of just throwing stuff at a wall and hoping it sticks. So now you are, like you mentioned, like now you have qualitative like data points that actually are tied to like they're tied to sentiment as opposed to just like CPM or CPC or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very cool. And you go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, and like that service like is really designed to help nail down what's the ideal customer profile, like what's the right segment of the market to be focusing on, at least right now, like the lowest hanging fruit, and what should we be saying to them to like most efficiently start the conversations. And that's just like that's your strategy basically. And then we take that and we will stack more channels on top of it and we'll like execute on it. So, but it's kind of the precursor. What we've learned is that like, if you don't get that right, then no matter how well you execute, it's sort of like you're multiplying zero.
Yeah.
Like if you start with like a 1% conversion rate with sort of a sloppy execution, and then you nail the execution, you multiply that significantly. But if you start with like a 0% conversion rate or like a really abysmal conversion rate because you don't have the right strategy, you're not targeting the right people with the right message, then, no matter how well you execute, you're going to basically just be throwing money out the door. So
you're codifying a product market fit. Essentially.
I'm trying to.
Yeah.
Doing my best.
So what, that's really, really interesting. And that's a really cool service. And I've never heard of anything like this. I've heard of people that obviously do like act as like an outsourced sales in a variety of different capacities, or obviously lead generation to some extent, but never something that what is your feedback from customers that have used it or is it, I don't know how new it is. So I apologize if it's very, very new.
No problem. No, we started in May, and the first couple clients we did it with, like we were sort of figuring it out as we went, and I'd say it really kind of started solidifying in like June, July. I think we've had 5 or 6 clients complete it so far, and I think more than half of them have gone on to continue working with us in a larger capacity. One I know was extremely, like I actually did the exit interview, and they felt that like I think the NPS was like 9 or something, or maybe like it was really high. But it was actually a little bit surprising because what we found, like they got some traction in some of the ideas we had. But the problem was the market segment was like mid to lower market, and the deal sizes were too small. Mm-hmm. So we found that there was we didn't find a viable like ROI sort of strategy for them. Like basically the cost of acquiring a customer versus like the margins on their product or service didn't work. And so at the end, we basically invalidated that we could do sales development for them, which was kind of the point. Outbound validation. So that client didn't end up continuing to work with us, but they basically went and said, we got to go kind of reevaluate our business. And if we can address
that is so important for an early stage company, because, you mentioned it, and it's even a problem that you saw in your first business where, you got $1 million, revenue booked or billed, whatever, in over a course of so many years. But is that a scalable business? Is that something that can truly, 10x, like get to 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, whatever your exit is. And it could be that the numbers just don't work.
Yeah. So the ones that I'm actually most excited about are like near the end of their engagements right now. So I'm really hoping that, I'm quite confident they're going to be happy to give us a case study. I'm sure we'll get at least 1 or 2 case studies out of them. But like, because we keep getting better at it. Right. And, so I think we're up to we're on our like 8th or 9th client now doing this, and I think we just kicked off our 9th. And
I'll tell you something. If you validate this, if you can continue to validate and get better at this product, you're going to have like investors, venture capitalists, family office. They're all going to be knocking down your door because now you have a way of finding if the company has a clear path to revenue or not.
Yeah. Well, we work a lot with private equity firms. Like that's big. Like we've been working with private equity firms actually before I joined the company, and not just in this capacity, just because when you do have a product market fit, we're so good at executing. I mean, historically, that you basically just you give us a strategy that works, we'll execute on it, and we'll just like fill your team's sales pipeline with leads. Like we have some clients that we've generated like over 100 meetings a month for, and things like that. They're not all like that. But most of the private equity clients that we get are because they've done their due diligence. Usually the clients that are more on the struggling side is because they don't have the product market fit sorted out. So, so we're hoping now that that'll basically expand our opportunities to work more with sort of the Series A, Series B stage companies that aren't necessarily like as robust as a private equity sort of play, in terms of their knowledge of their market and things like that, but still help them see comparable success. That's ultimately what we're working towards.
And do you have out of the few customers that you've worked and sort of actually executed it or implemented this product for, do you have best practices for what works and what doesn't? Like what should companies be looking for? Very high level, like agnostic of industry.
Sorry, can you,
Like,
in what context?
so when somebody's looking for a product market fit,
Oh, I see.
you're validating certain components of what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Agnostic of industry, what have you seen is something to look for in somebody who is like maybe an early stage, a bootstrap or Series A?
Well, I mean, there's product market fit is like quite a beast of a challenge,
Yes.
and like it's the biggest challenge. It's the thing that knocks down startups more than anything, really. And they might say, "Oh, well, we ran out of money," or "Oh, we had a disagreement with the co-founder." But there's so many examples of companies that nail the product market fit, and they're one of the co-founders slept with the VC, and they are constantly at each other's throats, and the product's constantly crashing. Yet somehow they're still successful. It's because it kind of goes back to the Mark Andreessen post of originally defining product market fit. It's like the market pull is the thing that matters. So. But it's really difficult, and so I think to answer your question, like it's a kind of to answer it succinctly is challenging, but I'll do my best.
Okay, I appreciate it.
So basically,
I know it's a huge question. I just want to know, like, because you see so many data points, like you must start to see trends about what people should at least look for. I'm not saying they should definitely they shouldn't try to do this on their own. They should go and hire you. But I mean,
oh no, yeah. and I wouldn't even suggest that. There's gonna be a lot of companies that we wouldn't be a good fit with.
Yeah.
B2C for one, or just B2B that has a smaller deal size.
Yeah.
But anyway, so basically, there's I forget the guy's name. I'm drawing a blank. But basically, there's someone who put together this survey where essentially, if you ask people like how upset would you be if our service no longer existed or our product no longer existed? And I think if it's like more than 40% say that they'd be like really upset, then you kind of have product market fit. So that's like one way of looking at it. The Mark Andreessen way of looking at it is basically like it's like if people are coming to you faster than you can like keep up with like onboarding them, you're drowning in support requests. You can't keep your servers up because like your sort of usage is way beyond anything you'd scoped for, and so your servers keep crashing. You can barely keep up. Money's coming into your bank account faster than you can like spend it, and you're like, oh my god! Every time you look at the bank account, there's more and more money in it. Like that is their definition of product market fit, or his and. Yeah. But I mean, like those things are kind of interesting indicators of like if you get there, but like the question is, how do you get there?
Yeah.
Like that's the hard part. And to me, like, I don't know, like to be honest, like when it comes to this question, I still have a bit of imposter syndrome because I've spent so much time studying it.
Yeah.
I actually realize how much I don't know. So I want everyone listening to kind of take this with a grain of salt because
it's funny because even you're self-aware of what you know and what you don't know, but you're still probably more knowledgeable than most people listening to what constitutes a good product market fit, or if you're on the right path.
Yeah, but I am mindful of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, and
yes.
A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So I think what I'm just going to share here is going to be constructive. I'm pretty sure, but I just want to say that there's probably some serial entrepreneurs gone VC out there that know like way better than I do. So the way I look at it is it starts with a qualitative understanding and then and then evolves into more of a quantitative understanding. And so the very first thing you really want to be doing is, trying to isolate a group of people who are all trying to do the same thing, who all want the same thing. And the way I think about that using jobs to be done theory is like, they're all trying to get the same job done and for similar reasons in the same context or very similar context. And the funny thing is that, as a marketer, you tend to look at things like, demographics, firmographics, like all these, but it really boils down to like what people want. And so it doesn't matter all these demographical attributes that people look at, like those are just sort of like proxies for the actual thing that matters, which is what do they want? So, so that's number one is you got to find a group of people who all want the same thing. And the easiest sort of best way to do that, frankly, is having conversations, interviewing them and doing it right. Like, there are all sorts of traps. Like you want to avoid cognitive biases. So you got to approach this like a scientist or like an investigator. It's like you think that there has been a crime where all these people have been wronged in some way, and you're trying to like investigate the culprit. Like who's causing all these people all this pain, right? You can't go into it being like, I want them to like my idea. Yeah. So you got to like leave any ideas you have behind and really just try and understand like what does this group of people want. And then work from there towards a solution. And so like Ash Maurya is like really good at sort of articulating like he gives this analogy, when it comes to startups or building new products. It's like you got a door, like your market is like a door with a lock on it, and you're building a key. And so what most people do is they'll build a key and they'll go door to door to door to door trying to open doors. Like, what are the odds that you're going to just build a random key and be able to go and open some random door that you walk up to?
I love the analogy. That's a great analogy. Yeah,
it is. I got to credit Ash Murray for that one.
Yeah, that's really good.
But yeah, if you pick a door and you study the lock and you basically act like a locksmith and then you design a key specifically for that lock, you can open the door. And sometimes I think that, there's these waves of technology that come, right? And whenever there's like a new wave of technology and it sort of goes from it's over the hype cycle and it actually gets developed and it's hitting that like plateau of productivity or whatever, and it's becoming viable. Like there's this whole new suite of opportunities for being able to unlock sort of new ways of solving problems. And so that's like being able to combine those things as part of the equation. And so you might discover a real market opportunity, but like the way to solve that might not come for another 8 years or something, especially if you're looking at a specific type of technology. So that's the second sort of challenge, is being apprised of all these things. That's why it's so hard, is because like it's a very complex challenge. Yeah. And then you run into the risk too of the market being too small. Yeah. I mean, you want to try and pick like a job to be done, a sort of a contextual progress people want to make. You have a very small group of people who really, really, really want to make that progress. But if you help them make that progress and you basically make it easier to make that progress, more and more and more and more people are going to also want to make that progress. Yeah. So you basically develop a solution that addresses an existing, really compelling market need for a very small group of people. But by doing so, it makes the market grow, because the more people who see, oh, wow, they were able to make that progress, I want to make that progress too. And so then it kind of,
that's a blue ocean, right? That would be the blue ocean strategy, where you're technically building your own market. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And usually when you have like a product flying off the shelf type product market situation, or a product market fit situation, it's because you're building a new market. Like, it's rare that you're going to go into a really noisy market and do that, unless you've got something really novel and compelling that like allows people to make some whole new type of progress. Otherwise, why would they be flocking to you if there's all these comparable competitors? So
very true. And that's really what I wanted to sort of unbundle, because of course, it's always funny when you're so deep into a product or even like an industry. It's very hard to remove yourself and understand that every little bit of knowledge that you have is actually quite relevant to people that aren't as engaged or as involved. So I asked you about product market fit, and what you gave over was like perfect. Like, that's really what I wanted to get people to take away. But for you, it's like, oh, this is just like skimming the surface. This is like not even like, this is not even close to actually really capturing everything and of course it isn't. But the whole point is, how many people don't even do what you just mentioned? A lot. It's right?
Not, I wouldn't say it's common practice. I wish it was. I mean, when you look at it depends where you look. I think there are certain organizations, in California, I think about things like Techstars and Y Combinator, and there's like really good quality accelerators where they, this is what they preach and this is what they hold the companies accountable to. Then again, there's a lot of accelerators out there that are founded by people who, haven't had a lot of success, don't really know, and maybe aren't keeping up to date on the theory. And so they aren't preaching that. And so if you are in an accelerator and they're not like hounding you to constantly be going out and interviewing your customers and things like that, you might not be getting the best of advice, because there's one thing I'm confident in is like, if you want to have success beyond just blind luck, you need to understand your customers really well. Yeah. Even whether you're an engineer or unless you have someone else in the company who's doing it for you as a co-founder or whatnot. But basically, you get out and talk to people and really understand what they want. That's half the equation.
And do you find, I was going to actually just speak to one other thing that Predictable does, and obviously that's sort of unpackaging and then and optimizing what a company's already doing. Is that the number one thing that you find companies haven't done properly? Just getting that real feedback, or is there other parts to what you unpackage that you also think is like a huge inhibitor of a company's success?
Yeah, I mean, because our clientele is not necessarily really early stage startups. Like, we tend to work, like, we're only going to be working with them if they've done some significant funding. Yeah. In some cases, they maybe don't have a lot of customers, so they are kind of pre-product market fit for sure. And product market fit these days, I mean, it started out as a very specific thing, which was like kind of that story I told where, like the money's coming in the bank account faster, you can spend it, and you can't keep up with the demand and all those things. That's sort of like the explicit definition that was the original definition of product market fit. But today it's treated like a spectrum. right? And so it isn't like there isn't this like clear threshold per se. It's like something you work towards. But using that original definition, most companies don't ever see product market fit, yet they can still be viable, successful businesses. So, but to answer your question, like what we see as like the most common struggle is like it varies dramatically. It's often execution specific, and it isn't necessarily like we get a lot of clients that they've tried to do outbound sales themselves and they weren't able to, so they came to us. But we also get a lot of companies that were like, their advisor or somebody told them, hey, we should do this, and then they're like, well, how are we gonna do it? They go into research, they find us, and they're like, okay, well, let's just get them to do it.
Yeah.
Or like let's get them to come in and help us build it. So it's not as if they like were stuck on something and then we helped them get unstuck. It's just we decided to work with a guide right from the start. But I do think that like the earlier stage the company is, of course, the more the product market fit side of things becomes a problem. And so best practice, yes, is to do lots of discovery interviews and really understand your customers and model them with psychographics, and that becomes your theory, and then you go and you systematically test that theory at scale. And so it starts with these qualitative conversations, but then you need to basically scale that up somehow, like test it at a larger scale. And so then you're switching from that to you basically have two options as far as I'm concerned. You have surveys and you have experiments. And surveys are really hard to get right. Like they are certain situations where they're the best thing to do, but they can be really expensive and they can be really, really hard to get right. And I feel like there's most people out there don't really know how to do surveys well consistently, and that's me included. I really struggle to get surveys right. I think the best surveying method I've ever come across that was really useful and constructive on a couple projects I did is called something called outcome-driven innovation, which is like developed by Anthony Ulwick, and it's very, very robust and can be quite expensive. So it's a bit cumbersome for an early stage startup. It's kind of not practical. It's more for like Johnson & Johnson launching a new toothpaste or something, and they're going to invest like $50 million into it or whatever. So they want to like really make sure that they get it right. It's great. And if we could somehow apply that process to like streamline it and make it more approachable and like more economical for an early stage company, like that would be amazing. And that's something I think a lot about. So the next best thing I could come up with was basically this experimentation sort of process where instead of doing surveys, you're still creating sort of this model, this psychographic model, but then you're testing it with sort of engagement experiments. In the same way that you would test like the language in the targeting in an ad, we're doing that, but we're just doing it to start conversations, and then so we get like the quantitative learning and the qualitative learning, like I was saying before.
Yeah.
So it's not really where you want to start. It's more so the second step, as I see it. The first step should be interviewing customers, and we've thought about doing that for our clients, but my opinion is that it really should be the CEO or like the founder of the company or whoever's ultimately responsible for the customer success. Should really be the person who does those interviews. And so I don't know. I've toyed with the idea of us doing them, but I think that it's so much better if the actual company themselves does it.
Yeah. And then once they have started that process and they just can no longer scale it, that's when you can bring in other tools or whatnot.
Yeah, like if they let's say interview a bunch of people and they come to us and they're like, okay, we think this group who wants it for this reason and this group who wants it for that reason, and they basically bring all these ideas to us, then we can break those down and test them at scale like way more efficiently than they'll be able to do themselves. But when it comes to the actual interview, like we might be able to execute the interview a little better, we might be a little less biased and things like that, but we're not going to be like exponentially better, I don't think, at least. And also, I just feel like this is something that at least one of the founders in every company should be good at. So by doing it for them, we're kind of doing them a disservice, in my opinion. So that's another reason why I don't really want to do that.
Do you find just to differ, because I can understand. Sorry, let me premise. So when I first understood predictable revenue as somebody who does work with sales consulting, I had no idea, and I'm not probably the best indicator because I haven't personally looked into you as much as maybe someone else has, and I haven't done my research to somebody who's actually going to hire you and onboard you. But when I looked at predictable revenue, I assumed like sales consulting. So I think that when you assume sales consulting, the sales consultants that I've worked with in the past are a certain type of teaching somebody how to do outbound or teaching somebody how to converse with customers. Like there's all these different types of sales coaches, but I've never really seen as data-driven a practice as yours. from any sort of outsourced sales coach or any type of company that does it or plays in the same space. And what I wanted to sort of bring out from that is, what are some of the worst practices that you've seen from competitors that you would like to sort of like red flag for people who hire sales consultants? What would somebody say when they're interviewing a consultancy organization that should make them like run for the hills?
Right. Well, okay. So I mean, there's the whole, like, when you look at sales, you've got the front end, which is like the research into prospects and to your market and isolating the right people to reach out to. And then you've got like starting those conversations, so reaching out and like basically getting people into the sales funnel. And then you've got sort of the managing of the relationship and the closing. And I think when I hear sales consultancy, they could be consulting at any point in that process. And we have done consulting, and we can do consulting at the later stages, like the closing and stuff, because we are good at that stuff. But like really our specialty is at the front end or the top of the funnel. Yeah. It's like, how do I distillate your market and get those people in your sales funnel on a consistent basis, so that way you are consistently hitting your sales goals. And we do, like, when we do consultancy, we're breaking down breakpoints and things like that tracking these things so that you can isolate where's the bottleneck. So things like that. And then my sort of focus has been on the product market fit and then the filling the sales funnel. So I'm not the right person to ask, I think, when it comes to like, if you bring in a sales consultancy to help your close rate, I don't really know what would be good or bad and how to evaluate that well. There's other people in the company that would probably be able to answer that question really well, but just not me. So for me, I think what I can do is I can focus on the sales development side. Yeah, sure. So if a company is basically evaluating hiring like a sales development agency or like someone to help them do sales development, for one, like there aren't that. I mean, okay, so if they're a consultancy, I'd say the best thing would be just to get case studies, get referrals, like ask them for like 3 customer referrals, and then go and interview those customers and ask them, how was the experience? What was it like? Because it's a whole bunch of things. It's like, did they get the success out of it? Were they easy to work with? Were they reliable and all that sort of, like, there's so many aspects to the consultancy side of it. But if you're hiring a sales development agency that's basically going to do it for you, I mean, for one, it's like, am I going to get success? So you could still look at the like case studies and referrals thing. But I think there is another thing that's kind of what you're looking for here. So if the agency you're going to work with is like cheap, so like you're doing it based on cost, and what you're losing for paying less is you're not going to get copywriting, or they're just going to they'll write the template for you, but they're going to basically interview you or talk to you and be like, okay, so what should go in the template? And then they just put that in the template. And so if you end up with if you talk to them like, what's the copywriting process like? How do we decide who to target? And if they're giving you answers that are very high level and very much sound like, well, they're basically just going to interview you and ask you and then put that into the campaign. That would be a concern, because what we do is I mean, of course, you need to be asked. They have to unpack everything you know. But what we do is we unpack everything you know, and then we sort of mix our experience into that, and we will challenge you on writing a copy. You don't really. The clients that we struggle with the most are the ones who want final say on all the copy and are constantly trying to change our copy after we've written it, and they're making it significantly worse. They're taking out the part about what the customer wants and putting in more about their features of their product that nobody cares about and stuff like that. And so if they're kind of going along with that and being like, oh yeah, no, we'll put whatever in the copy that you want, and they're not standing their ground and kind of using the challenger sale type technique where they're trying to educate you on sales development during the sales process, before you've decided to work with them, and really helping you understand where might you fall down and why we do it this way and all those sorts of things, that would be what concerns me. Yeah, I would think to look out for. That's a really
good answer, actually. And I think that I've seen that before in some consultants that I have worked with. They kind of are just like a sounding board, and they're reiterating everything that you're telling them, and then they're just sort of building out a process around that, which really you should be able to do yourself if you're any sort of founder or sales leader anyways, right? So
I mean, you're just going to get the execution in that case. And so if the strategy is wrong, you're just going to be stuck with it, and you're going to not get the results you want, and you're not going to know if it's because of their execution or because of this bad strategy. And you'll probably assume it's because of their execution, or you'll just go, oh, I didn't work. And then you'll go, oh, sales development agencies aren't trustworthy or they don't work.
Yeah.
But by working with us, I mean, one of the things we do, depending on our service, we're locking you in for months.
Yeah.
Right. Because it takes time to figure these things out. We know that. Like, you're not going to get it on the first try. And like, the reason we developed that service where we try 40 ideas in 2 months is because, I mean, we do a month of workshopping to build out all the theories and everything. And then we do 2 months of campaigning where we do 40 experiments in 2 months, because we know, like, it's better to do 40 experiments in 2 months than 10 experiments in, 6 months.
Yeah.
We're going to learn more faster, and we're going to get to the right strategy faster. Whereas, like, if you hire a sales development agency and they give you like 2 campaigns, they're month to month. That's another kind of red flag, because that means they're trying to compete on getting clients that are not willing to make the commitment, and they're like afraid of taking that risk of committing. And so there's just no way they're going to be able to figure it out in a month, like, unless they get extremely lucky.
I've seen even worse. I've seen people that commit to like a session or a day, and with no follow up, and it just blows my mind how they think that could ever be successful, or even under. I don't even think personally I could understand enough in a day to come up with a strategy, let alone understand and then teach over in the same day. It's a ludicrous idea in my opinion, but and I think that the confidence in your own abilities to lock in a customer for 6 months and again challenge them and say this is not going to be a short-term fix. This you are building a business for the rest of your life. Like, slow down, do it right the first time. I think that's incredibly important to understand. I don't really have much more on terms of the products that Predictable Revenue actually delivers. I think you did like an awesome job in sort of breaking it down, and I really do appreciate it, because I think that people that are either revenue leaders or, again, like founders, I think that working with some of these outbound strategies that you've developed now, I think can be incredibly important. And like you said, a lot of successful companies may not have ever found product market fit, but they may be considered successful. But I think I would challenge those leaders and say, how much more successful could you be if you did use a service like what you offer? I think that for Predictable Revenue and the services, I think that we're good, unless you wanted to add anything else. I just kind of wanted to wrap up to understand like a little bit more about you, and it won't be much more, but is there anything that I missed about the services that Predictable Revenue offers that you wanted to go over?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think I'll just say that like we're pretty picky about the clients we bring on, because we've got too much experience doing this. And I'll tell you, like, our culture is set up in a way where, every week we do this thing called Beers and Tears, where it's like at the end of the day on Friday. And, the things that we're sharing are basically, there's a variety of things. If we're dealing with a technical challenge that's affecting a bunch of people company, that's like a tier. But, the things that usually dominate those conversations are client closed like $1 million deal from a lead that we gave them, or, they're up to, X pipeline or something, like some sort of, something that stands out. And sometimes even like if we have a client that, 2 months in, they close a 50,000 deal with us, like that's still amazing too, if they got a really short sales cycle. It's not necessarily size, it's more like context. And then, or if a client's struggling, and then, they bring out like, I'm struggling with this client, and, I haven't gotten any meetings in the last like 4 weeks or something like that. And we so for one, we really feel that pain when a client's not doing well. And so we've scrutinized like, well, what does it take for a client to do well? And we have gotten pretty picky about which clients we bring in, so we don't bring in ones that are going to struggle. And also when that happens, we kind of pile on a bunch of resources to try and turn it around. But we've had situations where even despite all of our best efforts, we just can't find success. And so we'll let them out of the contract early and things like that. And it almost always boils down to lack of product market fit, which is kind of back to all the other things I shared. And then the only thing I want to say is it's not really about predictable revenue, but it's just like, the way I kind of look at outbound sales now is that you have like the strategy side of the equation and the execution. And on the strategy side, you've got like targeting, messaging, and channel, right? And it's kind of marketing link, like it's the way of looking at it from a marketing perspective. And then on the execution side, you have all the tactics and things like how you set up your team, the tools you use, et cetera. It's like how you optimize in the execution. And the targeting and the messaging, or I should say, so the channels and the tactics, or the channels and the execution, like you can read books, you can go online and learn and like read about what other people are doing. You can listen to podcasts like this, and learn all sorts of techniques and tricks and tools and things that will help you better execute. And maybe say something like, oh, you read Critical Revenue in 2010, and you go, oh, I should diversify away from cold calling and also be sending emails. Right. And then nowadays you might learn or read like, oh, I should also be like reaching out to people on LinkedIn, or I should be like posting videos on LinkedIn or on social media, things like that. I should be developing content, or I should be doing a podcast. And, so like from a channel perspective, like you can always learn from other people. But when it comes to targeting and messaging, you can't learn that from anyone else. It's unique to your business. You have to approach it like a scientist, come up with a theory and test it. And you basically learn how to optimize that through iteration by testing it. So that's kind of the message I want to leave with people is, I think half of the equation is about just following best practices, and then the other half of the equation is about really figuring it out for yourself. And that's kind of the theory behind how we approach our services.
That's awesome. That's really good. And I think that again, it brings it back to best practices so people can continuously see success in their business. I think that a lot of people will get sort of inundated with all these different channels and strategies to put their brand out there. But if you haven't developed what your brand is and your core values and your messaging and your voice and all that, it's just going to be noise, and it's not going to resonate with anybody. So I think that that's super important to do, and understand that it has to be you, not just throwing stuff out there and hoping that it sticks. Again, it's all about doing it thoughtfully. I wanted to wrap up just to help people that are listening through their career progression. Your CPO, if you were going to look at yourself when you were like 14, 15 years old,
Sure.
were you anything like what you are now? And if yes, awesome. But if not, like, how did you sort of mature yourself and grow into who you are?
Okay. So when I was 14, I was definitely really lazy. So work ethic was a big one. I actually way back in my career before I was coding for fun as a hobby, but I wasn't doing it professionally. I was actually I went to culinary school, and I was like a fine dining cook and chef for a while. So I did about did about 3.5 years of that. And so I had not literally Gordon Ramsay, but like a Gordon Ramsay equivalent screaming in my ear whenever I slacked or did anything stupid. So it's kind of like boot camp. Not that I've ever been in the military, but I liken it to that. It's like my little boot camp experience. It really kind of hardened me and straightened me out, and gave me a good work ethic. So I think that was a bit of an inflection point for me. But I don't know. I think beyond that, something I didn't used to do, but I do more now, is like when I went to school. When I was in school, and I don't quite know exactly what high school or elementary school is like these days. It probably depends where you grow up or what school you go to. But it was very much like teaching you what to think, not how to think, and memorizing stuff and not really building mental models or like a true deep understanding of how the world works. And I think that everyone would be better off if everyone endeavored to try to really understand what's happening and approach things more with curiosity and an open mind, rather than sort of like anchoring themselves in a specific opinion and like hanging on to that. Meditate, learn to meditate, take care of yourself, exercise. If you're stressed out, don't revert to escaping from the world. Try to do things to take care of yourself. Flush the cortisol out of your system and go in for a run or something like that. Basically take care of yourself and try and approach the world like a scientist no matter what you do, where you're actually trying to understand things. So you're kind of coming up with ideas of how you think things work. You have your own little theory or hypothesis, and then you go out and you kind of test it and you just do that over and over again and get so good at it that you do it subconsciously. And just try not to be afraid of failing or being wrong. Yeah, like the thing that holds people back the most is being afraid of failing or being afraid of being wrong. And then or escaping from the world when they're stressed out or anxious, rather than embracing it and meditating on it.
Very good. That's incredibly important advice. Thank you for that. Anything that you would, what's one lesson that you would tell your 20-year-old self out of everything you just mentioned that was the most impactful? Just like one key takeaway, if you can sort of boil it down.
Be humble. And really understand what humility is.
That's good.
I don't know. These days, I'm a big fan of Ryan Holiday.
Yeah.
So probably read one of Ryan Holiday's books. if you're 20. I think that's probably a good time in your life.
And that sort of segues into the last thing I wanted to ask. Where do you go to learn? What resources? Podcasts, audibles, people? What's your go-to? Books, obviously.
Yeah, I read a lot of books. I like watching YouTube video lectures and interviews and podcasts. I don't tend to listen to podcasts. I tend to listen to books. I listen to the odd podcast, but the majority of my listening time is books. I'll usually have 3 books going. One is like, intermittent. I'll burn through a few hours on a weekend when I have time, kind of thing. One is next to the toilet.
Yeah.
And I'll chip away like 1 page at a time. And then one I'm listening to while I commute. And so that's the majority of the source of it. And then sometimes in the evenings I'll unwind and I'll watch a video on YouTube or something, and then they're usually like somewhat educational. I really like I like learning about like artificial intelligence research and things like that. So 2 channels I really like are 2-minute papers on YouTube. And it's basically they outline like the most recent research papers that are like really interesting in a little video, and sometimes they'll include like little like video demos and things like that of what it is, and it's mind blowing what's going on right now. Like being able to synthesize like you get 5 seconds of recording of my speech and you can create a synthesis that then you can type whatever you want and I'll say it.
That's crazy.
Like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like it's just like the world is about to change in a dramatic way, and that's like your sort of how you can see ahead of that is by looking at, and another one is I really like Lex Friedman. Yeah. He does interviews around artificial intelligence, some really cool ones. He like interviewed Ray Dalio recently.
Yeah, Ray Dalio. Yeah. That's Bridgewater.
Yeah, and he's interviewed like Elon Musk and some leaders and like some physicists and leaders in artificial intelligence research and stuff like that. So I like stuff like that.
Just like he's a good source to go to learn and to just listen to interesting people.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think so. He's like an MIT professor, and he interviews some pretty interesting people, and he talks about all sorts of different really interesting topics. But he tends to centralize it all around the advancement of artificial intelligence. And so, if you want to like understand how the world's evolving and like what the world's going to look like when AI fully develops, which no one really knows for sure, but like we're all figuring it out as we go. But if you want to be a part of that rather than sort of like get blindsided by it, those are 2 really good sources.
And for people that are I would hope, but I hope no one has the mentality that I don't need to focus on that because that's not my core business or that's not my core job function. But I think that I've bought into this, and I think that it's if you learn enough about artificial intelligence and where the world is heading, you are kind of already seeing that if you're a marketer, if you're an individual contributor as a sales rep, if you're a business leader, it doesn't really matter. It's going to impact you regardless. So.
To me, I think it's the most important thing happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
And it would be like it'd be like ignoring the internet in like the late 90s or something, or like early 2000s. Like not assuming that that's not going to be a big deal. It's like it's probably going to be as big, if not a bigger deal.
Yeah, no, for sure. And if people want to get in touch with you, where can they reach you?
LinkedIn would be best. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn. 95% of the connections I'll accept unless they look really sketchy. And if you include a message saying you heard me on the podcast or whatever, then I'll definitely accept it. And just fire me a question. I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Awesome, man. Okay, so that's all I got. Anything else on your end, or is that good?
No, I think that's good. Nothing else comes to mind.
All right, cool. So that was Kenny Mackenzie, Chief Product Officer at Predictable Revenue. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciated the talk.
Thanks, Scott. That was really fun. Cheers.
Cool. Cheers. Welcome to Scott's Thoughts, where we dive deep into some of the topics that we were just discussing on the Sales versus Marketing podcast. So we just spoke with Kenny Mackenzie, and Kenny Mackenzie is the Chief Product Officer at Predictable Revenue. And he had a ton of great insights, but I want to go deep into 2 of the things that he spoke about. So obviously the theme of this, if you can pull one out, was definitely finding proper product market fit. And one of the analogies that Kenny used, and it wasn't his analogy, but I am glad he brought it up, was the way that most organizations find product market fit is they have a key, and that key is obviously their product or their widget or their service that they're trying to sell. And in front of them are a variety of doors, locked doors. And the locked doors all represent customers or personas or different use cases for their product or their widget. And a lot of companies will go door to door to door with their key, trying to unlock that door and find a fit for their product. Kenny, through this analogy, reiterates that we have to flip this concept, this dogma of how to find product market fit on its head. And the analogy goes like this. Instead of having one key and going through a variety of different doors, let's do this. Let's have one door. We figured out that's the door that we want to unlock. And now we're a locksmith and we are going to craft the key. We're going to craft the product so that we can unlock that one door. And that is so important to remember as a founder, as a CEO, but I'm going to take it a step further. And this is something that we didn't really discuss. But I want to give a little bit of context and a little bit of relevance to people that are earlier on in their career. So they're not a CEO, they're not a founder, they're, for example, a sales rep, an SDR, AE, whatever. They're an individual contributor and they want to understand how this analogy applies to them. Because the first thing you're going to say is, well, I cannot obviously rebuild my product. I already have the product. How does this analogy apply to me and my customers? Okay, so let's think about this. So your job as a sales rep is to bring this product to your customer. And what I think a lot of sales reps do, if they don't have the proper guidance and the proper training, which I would assume, and I've seen personally, is in most organizations, is they're just going to take their product and they're going to throw it at as many different personas and use cases as possible. And this is the equivalent of having one key and multiple locked doors. So let's take this analogy and understand how it applies to the sales rep. I would argue that as a sales rep, you still have to understand who your ideal persona is. And this is something that should be built out between sales and marketing. And once you've understood who that persona is, then you can craft your messaging, your crafting of your messaging and highlighting the features and the benefits and the solutions to your customers' pain points. That is you crafting the key. So yes, you do not have a hand in impacting the product per se. You have a built product, but the way that you position it, the messaging and the features that you highlight, into not just features, obviously, the way that they solve problems for your customers, that will be you building your key, so to speak, to unlock that door that you want to unlock. But you have to know who that target customer is, and then you craft your messaging around it. And if somebody hasn't done that for you, if your organization hasn't done that for you, that is something that you can do yourself as a sales rep, as somebody who wants to be successful in their role within an organization. And through understanding this analogy and through building out your messaging to be tailored to your target customer, you will be more successful, as opposed to just throwing everything at a wall and hoping something sticks. The second point second of many points that Kenny spoke about that I wanted to go into was the importance of speaking with your customers and getting feedback. And again, Kenny spoke about it in the context of a founder finding product market fit. And the best way to do that is to go out and speak to your customers, get feedback. And once you get that feedback, then you can, if you can't scale that data aggregation and collection process on your own, because obviously it's very hard to continue to do that as your business scales, then you can go hire an organization like Predictable Revenue to help continue to optimize your results as you grow. However, I would say that the idea of speaking to customers as a founder, CEO, obviously very important, and you should be doing that for sure. But as your business grows, let's find another reason for why this is so important, why this concept. If you are a revenue leader, you're a director of sales, a VP of sales, a VP of marketing, and you are going into a role, you have tons of experience, you're going into a new organization, and you're just leveraging that experience, and you aren't going into the field at all, not all your time, but at all, to go speak to customers, to go get feedback, to go shadow calls, sit in on appointments with your sales reps, and you're just sort of counting on what you've known in the past, one of two things will happen. Either you won't be effective or you won't be effective as quickly as you could be. So I am a strong supporter that if you are especially a revenue leader, I would say marketing or sales, you are going to customers, you're pitching the product, you're sitting in on meetings with sales reps, you're getting feedback from the customer, and you are using that to improve your own understanding of the regular interactions sales has with customers, regular objections, and really you should be able to sell the product yourself. And when you can sell the product yourself and you know best practices, it's very hard, if not impossible, to do that without actually selling a deal or two yourself, especially as a revenue leader. So I think that you should be out there, at the very beginning, getting your hands dirty until you feel comfortable that you know exactly how the customer is going to act. And that's when you will be more effective at managing and helping the people that work on your team grow and succeed. So I think that customer feedback, the founder is most likely going to be doing it. If they aren't, go do it. But any executive in any new role, take the responsibility on yourself to go get that customer feedback and go speak to customers and go improve your understanding of how they actually view your company, your product, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, if you're a sales rep, you're going to be doing that, but I think that it's much more important to do it as somebody who's going to be leading sales teams and leading marketing teams and building up messaging to get that honest, real-time, live, in-person feedback. So those are the 2 points that I really wanted to double down on. That was an incredible interview. So thank you so much to Kenny and Predictable Revenue for joining me on the Sales versus Marketing podcast. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you haven't already, please hit like, hit subscribe, leave a rating, and any rating's cool as long as it's a 5-star rating. You can download this podcast or stream it wherever you can download podcasts. So iHeart, Spotify, iTunes, any podcast platform. You can also watch this interview on YouTube if that's your style. And as always, I hope everyone has a super, super productive week and they enjoyed this episode of the Sales versus Marketing podcast. We will speak again soon. Bye now.